She signed a marriage contract to save her family's business. He gave her everything: a ring, a mansion, and a rule. Never asked me about the past. But one night, while standing alone in the rain, she whispered, "Why do you look at me like that?" And he said, "Because you held my hand when I had nothing and forgot I existed." This wasn't just a deal. This was the second chance he never thought he'd get. Welcome, soul seekers, to Hearts of the Rich, where every luxury hides a secret and every fortune comes with a price. Tonight's story isn't just about love. It's about sacrifice, memory, power, and the girl who thought she married a stranger, only to discover he'd been loving her in silence for half his life. If that hits your heart even a little, subscribe now and like this video to help more souls find stories that heal, haunt, and hold on. And in the comments, tell me, would you marry someone to save your family, even if it meant losing yourself? Type, "I choose both," if you still believe love can come from the past you forgot. Now take a breath. Let's begin. She didn't recognize his voice. Not yet. Not when he said her name, softly, like it tasted familiar in his mouth. "Celia." She turned, confused by the silence that followed. No boardroom, no lawyer, no conference table. Just him, Reese Carrington, standing in a private glass atrium, holding a single folder like it was an answer he already knew she'd give. There was no smile, no hint of warmth, only stillness and purpose. She had expected formality, distance, but not this. Not a man who looked at her like he was waiting for something more than just a signature. 2 weeks earlier, her world had fallen apart. Heart and daughter's antiques, her family's pride, her grandfather's dream, was collapsing under 3 generations of unpaid taxes and 1 generation of bad luck. Her father, kind but proud, had hidden the truth with tight smiles and sleepless nights. The house was mortgaged. The business was 1 month from closure. And Celia? She was 1 breath away from selling her mother's wedding ring just to pay the electric bill, until a letter arrived. No stamp, no return address, just an envelope, heavy, expensive, and hand-delivered. "Mr. Reese Carrington requests your presence. No need to bring anything but your answer." She thought it was a mistake, until she saw the name, until she stood in front of him, until he said it again, her name, like it mattered. He motioned to the chair across from him. She didn't sit. He placed the folder between them and said it plainly, "Your family's in debt. I can erase it." Her voice barely worked, and in return, he didn't blink. 2 years, marriage, in public, no intimacy, no expectations. She blinked slowly. "Why me?" He exhaled through his nose. "Steady, measured, because I need a wife. And you." His eyes met hers, unwavering. "You'll do." She stiffened. Her cheeks burned, not with shame, but with something harder to name. He had no right to say it like that. And yet somehow, he hadn't meant it cruelly, just truthfully. A transaction, cold, necessary, and she had nothing left to bargain with. She didn't ask for more time, didn't call her father, didn't beg for a way out. Instead, she lifted her chin and asked, "When would this begin?" Reese stepped closer, his voice like thunder just before it breaks. "Immediately." And in that moment, Celia Hart, the girl who once believed in real love, in antique stories, in mothers who didn't die young and fathers who didn't break, nodded her head and said yes, to a stranger she didn't know, to a past she didn't remember, and to a future she no longer controlled. The contract arrived the next morning. No knock, no signature, just a silver envelope slipped beneath her door, thick, elegant, and far too quiet. Her name was printed across the front in heavy ink. No miss, no title, just Celia. It felt like a whisper from a man who didn't raise his voice, because he never had to. Inside were 6 rules, typed, numbered, final, the kind of rules that didn't invite questions. Rule 1, the marriage would last 2 years. No extensions, no early exits. It was a term, not a vow. Rule 2, in public, she would smile, stand beside him, with a ring. No exceptions. Rule 3, they would reside at Carrington Hall, but they would not share a room. Rule 4, she would not speak of the past, his or hers. Rule 5. She could not fall in love with him. Rule 6. He would not fall in love with her. She stared at the last two. Read them again. Then again. Rule 5 made her scoff because she wasn't that foolish. But Rule 6? That one stayed in her throat longer than she liked. She set the envelope down and walked to the window. The estate's gardens stretched below like something out of a dream. Beautiful, silent, impossibly far away. And somehow, even from up here, she felt caged. That afternoon, she signed. Not out of bravery, not even out of resentment, but because reality had already stolen her choices. Her father's medication was due. The bank was waiting. Her mother's wedding ring was in a pawn shop window 5 blocks from their store. This wasn't marriage. This was sacrifice in a silk dress. And it wasn't even hers. The ceremony took place 2 days later. No flowers, no family, no music, just 2 pins, 1 judge, and Reese Carrington standing at the top of a courthouse staircase, as if even this moment was just another business acquisition. He wore black. No boutonniere. No emotion. He didn't speak when she arrived. Didn't offer his arm. Didn't blink when she stood beside him. Just handed her the pen and waited. She signed. So did he. The judge nodded. And just like that, Celia Hart became Mrs. Carrington. Legally, publicly, and irrevocably. There was no kiss, no champagne, no celebration. Just Reese leaning in to whisper, "The car is waiting. We leave now." She nodded and followed him down the steps, ignoring the stares of 3 paparazzi drones floating far overhead, quiet little vultures in the sky. They didn't speak on the drive to Carrington Hall. He scrolled his phone. She watched the hills blur past her window like pages in a story she hadn't written. And as the gates opened, tall, ornate, ancient, a thought struck her like ice across her chest. He has everything. Power, control, privacy. Why did he choose me? Because this didn't feel random, and it didn't feel finished. It felt like a beginning she hadn't prepared for. The mansion didn't look like a home. It looked like something built to be photographed. All symmetry and sharp edges, glass walls, and silence that echoed. Carrington Hall wasn't warm. It wasn't welcoming. It was perfect, the kind of perfect that made you feel like an intruder just by breathing. The car pulled up, and Reese stepped out first. He didn't offer his hand, didn't glance back. He simply walked up the front steps with the quiet confidence of a man who knew every camera was already off, but still held himself like he was being watched. Celia followed. Her dress was simple, her heels too tight, her heart louder than it should have been. Inside, the air was cool, scented faintly with cedar and lemon oil. A woman stood in the foyer. Tall, silver hair, crisp black skirt. She didn't speak at first, just looked at Celia and paused. Only for a moment. A flicker, but Celia noticed. "Have we met?" she asked. The woman shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, ma'am. Welcome home." Celia nodded, but something unsettled her. Not rudeness, not hostility. It felt more like recognition, from someone who wasn't supposed to recognize her. Reese reappeared a few minutes later, already loosening his tie. He walked her through the first floor like a man giving a real estate tour. Kitchen, library, guest wing, gym. He never asked if she was hungry, never asked if she was tired. He stopped in front of an elevator with a small gold panel beside it. "This goes to your floor," he said. "East side." She frowned. "You don't live there?" "No, I live in the west." A pause. She waited for more. There wasn't any. Instead, he handed her a key card and stepped back. "You'll find a wardrobe in the closet. Anything you need, tell house staff." She swallowed. "And you? I won't bother you unless necessary." It stung more than she expected. Not because she wanted him. Not yet. But because something in his eyes said he used to want someone. And that someone wasn't her anymore. The elevator was silent on the way up. When she stepped into her suite, it was like walking into a dream she didn't order. Pale linen curtains. Warm oak floors, art on the walls that clearly wasn't mass-produced. But the strangest part was the bookshelf. Dozens of titles, every one she loved as a child. Classics, obscure fantasy, her mother's favorite poetry author, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She pulled a book off the shelf, opened it. Inside the front cover was a note, scribbled in black ink. Page 73. You always skipped straight to it. Her breath caught. She flipped to the page. It was her favorite chapter, from a story she read 100 times before she was 10. But how would he know that? She sank into the velvet chair by the window, the book still in her hands, but no longer reading. This wasn't just luxury. This was deliberate. This man, this cold, quiet, unreadable man, had known her, or at least remembered something she no longer could. And she didn't know if that terrified her, or made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. The mansion was too quiet. Even the air felt rehearsed, like everything inside these walls had been placed there to be admired, not lived in. Celia wandered the halls that night, not with purpose, not with fear, just a feeling, like something was pulling her somewhere. She passed paintings older than her family's business, sculptures lit from below, a hallway that led nowhere but was still cleaned like someone might come through any minute. Carrington Hall had too many rooms, too many corners that whispered instead of spoke. And every now and then, she felt watched, not by people, but by memories that didn't belong to her. She ended up back in the East Wing, her floor, her suite. She made tea just to do something with her hands. The staff had stocked the cabinets with her favorite blend. Again, she hadn't asked, but someone knew. She stood at the window and stared into the dark, wondering what part of her life she'd forgotten and who had been watching her remember it. Then a thought. The West Wing, Reese's side of the house. She hadn't been told not to go there, but it was implied in the way his voice dropped every time he said my wing, in the way the housekeeper turned when she passed that hallway. Still, the mansion was quiet, and curiosity was louder than obedience. She padded barefoot down the west corridor, breath shallow, heart unsure. The lights flicked on automatically, golden and soft. No guards, no locked doors, only a hallway filled with tall bookcases and a single red door at the end. She paused in front of it. The doorknob wasn't cold. She turned it. It opened. The room inside was a private study, dimly lit, walls covered in maps, framed photos, shelves of first editions and journals. A fireplace, a worn leather chair, a desk with no computer, just paper, ink, and one open book. She stepped closer. It wasn't a book. It was a notebook, worn, leather-bound, the kind people didn't buy. They carried for years. She opened it and stopped breathing. Inside were pages of notes, thoughts, memories, dates, cities, names. And on the third page, her name, written over and over again. Celia Hart, Celia H., Celia, Rain, Celia, Sandwich, Frog Umbrella. You don't have to be alone today. Her fingers trembled. She turned another page. A sketch. 2 children holding hands in the rain. A drawing, not good but familiar. Lived in. And beneath it a line. She saved me. She doesn't remember. But I'll wait. Celia stepped back. Stumbled slightly. Closed the book. This wasn't just marriage. This wasn't random. This was history. And it had been living inside the man she thought was a stranger. She didn't sleep. Not after the journal. Not after the drawing. Not after seeing her name scrawled in handwriting that was too careful to be casual and too desperate to be professional. She kept replaying the words in her head. She saved me. She doesn't remember. But I'll wait. Celia didn't know what disturbed her more. The idea that he remembered everything. Or the aching truth that she had forgotten it all. She found him the next morning in the solarium. He was reading. No suit. No phone. Just a sweater and an untouched cup of coffee. The sunlight cast soft lines across his face, making him look younger than usual, and far lonelier. She stood in the doorway longer than she meant to. Then, quietly, I found your notebook. Reese didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. I know. Silence stretched between them. She stepped in. Why didn't you tell me? He closed the book, set it down, finally met her eyes. Would you have believed me? She opened her mouth. Closed it again. Fair. She crossed her arms, not in anger, but to hold something inside herself that had started shaking. You said this was a contract, a business deal. No past, no intimacy, no expectations. And I meant it, he said, but that doesn't mean the past stopped existing. She hesitated, then sat across from him. I saw the drawing, she said. The umbrella. The kids. Reese nodded slowly. That was the day I met you. Her voice softened. I don't remember. I know. He exhaled. When I was 6, I lived in a car with my mother behind an old church. We moved every few months. I didn't go to school. I barely spoke. That day it was raining. I got lost. I ended up on the edge of a park. Celia was still, listening, breathing like each word held weight. You were there, he said. Little rain boots. A frog umbrella. You gave me your sandwich and said, you don't have to be alone today. Then you told me your name and walked away. She blinked. That's it. He smiled faintly. For you, maybe. But for me, it was everything. She looked down. Her hands clenched in her lap. I'm sorry you forgot. You were 8, he said gently. You weren't supposed to remember. He paused. But I did. Every day. Tears pricked the back of her eyes. Not from guilt, but from the strange weight of it all. She had married a man she thought was a stranger. But he had carried a version of her in his mind for decades. And now she was living a house full of echoes she didn't recognize, but that had always been hers. Why did you find me? She whispered. After all this time? He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, because you're the first person who saw me. Not as a burden, not as a kid in the way, just a human. He leaned back in his chair. I became someone because of that. She wiped her cheek, surprised by the tear she didn't feel fall. And for the first time since the wedding, she wasn't angry. She wasn't confused. She was breaking open, softly, silently, and something in her chest whispered. Maybe he was never a stranger at all. The storm rolled in just after midnight. It started with wind, sharp against the windows, clawing at the old glass like it remembered secrets buried in the walls. Then came the rain, relentless, cold, not a cleansing rain, but the kind that unsettled everything it touched. Celia lay in bed, fully awake, heart loud in the quiet. She had barely spoken to Reese since the conversation in the solarium. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to feel. How do you hold kindness that was once a memory and now lives in the body of a man you barely know? How do you react when someone tells you they've been carrying your childhood for 20 years? She turned over, tried to sleep, but her skin was warm, too warm. By 2 a.m., her body was trembling. The fever hit fast, brutal. She didn't know if it was flu, exhaustion, or just the stress she'd tried to swallow since the wedding. She kicked the sheets off, but her limbs felt like stone. She tried to stand, collapsed back against the mattress. Her mouth was dry. Her hands couldn't hold the water glass. She reached for the call button by the bedside and missed. The room spun. She called out once, then again. Nothing. The staff was gone for the night. And for the first time since arriving at Carrington Hall, she was truly alone. Or she would have been, if he hadn't heard her. Reese found her on the floor, her body curled near the bed, her lips pale, her skin burning. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He moved fast, but calm, like he'd already imagined this once before and had trained himself how to respond. He lifted her gently, carried her back to the bed, pulled off the heavy blankets, opened the windows just slightly to let in air. He whispered her name like it was fragile, not loud, not urgent, just steady. Celia, I'm here. She tried to respond. Her eyes fluttered, barely open. He placed a cool cloth on her forehead and sat beside her. And he stayed. Minutes passed, then an hour. She drifted in and out. Once, she asked if it was morning. He smiled. Not yet. Another time, she mumbled, don't leave. And he said, never again. When she woke, really woke, it was still dark. He was still beside her, asleep in the chair, arms crossed, head back, hair slightly tousled. Not a CEO, not a contract, just a man who didn't leave. She stared at him for a long time. Her body still ached. Her throat was dry. But for the first time in days, the silence didn't feel cold. It felt safe. And in that stillness, she realized something. Maybe love didn't always arrive with fireworks or declarations. Maybe sometimes it just showed up when you needed it most and refused to leave. Carrington Hall came alive the following week, but not in the way homes do when something is blooming. It was the polished kind of alive. The sound of staff moving faster. The scent of flowers that had no smell. The echo of silverware placed too carefully. A dinner party was coming. 12 guests. All of them powerful. All of them with opinions. Celia wasn't told about it until the day before. The stylist came first. 3 dresses, all pre-tailored. One already chosen. The makeup artist followed. Then a woman she didn't know handed her a printed itinerary for the evening with phrases like strategic seating and photograph-friendly pairings. She stared at it. This wasn't a dinner party. This was a war disguised as charm. When the guests arrived, she stood beside Reese like she'd rehearsed it. Smile light, chin lifted, eyes soft, not too bold, not too shy. She'd been trained in this kind of crowd long ago, back when her parents' business still had clout. But that felt like a different life. Now, every compliment felt like a test, and every test had a silent judge. The first toast came from a silver-haired man whose name she couldn't remember, but whose laugh was loud and insincere. To Reese Carrington, he declared, who closes deals faster than anyone I know, even marriages. Laughter, clinks of glasses, eyes that turned toward her with interest disguised as politeness. She smiled, barely. The questions came next. So how did you two meet? What made you fall in love? Was it sudden or slow? She opened her mouth. Reese stepped in. Our beginning isn't for headlines, he said smoothly. But it was real, quiet, and ours. More smiles, more judgment. Celia swallowed the heat in her throat and let the conversation move on. But it didn't feel quiet. It didn't feel theirs. It felt rehearsed, staged, and maybe that's what hurt more than the lie. The fact that she wasn't even sure what the truth was anymore. Midway through the main course, she excused herself, slipped onto the back terrace, heels clicking against the stone, chest rising and falling faster than she wanted it to. She looked up at the sky. No stars, just clouds, and the faint thrum of the city beyond the hills. She didn't hear him until he was beside her. He didn't speak right away, just stood there. Then quietly, they don't matter. She laughed, bitter and soft. They do to you. He turned. They used to. A pause. Then she asked, finally, honestly, why me, Reese? Out of everyone, out of all the women in your world, why the girl with the frog umbrella who doesn't even remember saving you? His voice was still but not cold. Because you saw me before I became anything. And I needed to remember who I was before the world taught me to wear suits and say nothing. She blinked. I didn't do anything. You show me kindness when no one else did. He looked at her, eyes gentler than they'd been since the day they married. And whether you remember or not, I do. Every day. She looked down at her hands. Then slowly, she reached for his. For the first time, he didn't pull away. And neither did she. The night was heavier than the day had been. Guests were gone. Staff had retreated to their quarters. The house was quiet again, too quiet. Celia couldn't sleep. Not after what Reese said. Not after the way his hand had felt warm and steady in hers. She wandered the halls, barefoot, in the dress she hadn't changed out of. The silence in the mansion was almost suffocating, like the walls were keeping secrets that wanted to be heard. She made her way to the library. It was dark except for one dim lamp in the corner. And there, leaning against the tall windows, was Reese. He didn't notice her at first. He was holding something, a small, worn piece of paper. When she cleared her throat, he turned abruptly, eyes guarded. Sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. He shook his head. No, it's fine. She approached slowly, noticing the way he folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. But she didn't press. Not yet. Instead, she picked up a book from the nearest shelf, an old classic she'd read 100 times as a child. Do you read these? She asked, tracing the spine. Reese hesitated, then nodded. Sometimes. She didn't know why it made her smile. The idea of him, always so composed, retreating in his stories. She took a seat on the couch, curling her legs underneath her. He stayed by the window, tense but less guarded than usual. The tension stretched out between them, and she finally spoke. Quiet, honest. Why did you bring me here to this life, to your world? He looked at her, eyes softer than they had ever been. Because I thought I could forget, he admitted. But I couldn't. You were the one good memory I had from a time when everything else was broken. And then I saw you, grown up but still you, and I didn't want to let you disappear again. Her heart twisted, not in pain, in realization. This wasn't just business. This wasn't just strategy. It was survival. For both of them. She looked down at the book in her lap, running her fingers along the pages. Reese. He looked at her, waiting. What was on that paper? His jaw tensed, and she thought he wouldn't answer. But he did. It's a list, he said slowly, of things I wanted to say to you back then. Things I never had the courage to speak. Things I thought I'd forget if I didn't write them down. Her chest tightened. Can I see it? He hesitated. Then, with a quiet sigh, he pulled the folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. She opened it carefully, the old creases worn from being opened too many times. And there it was, childlike handwriting, crooked letters, and 3 lines. Thank you for the sandwich. I want to be like you when I grow up. You don't have to be alone. Her hand shook slightly. She looked up at him, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were just human, raw, exposed. I didn't know you kept this, she whispered. I kept everything, he replied, voice low. Every piece of that day. It was the first time I didn't feel invisible. She set the paper down and stood, walking over to him slowly. Her hand brushed his. He didn't pull away. And when he whispered her name this time, it wasn't a command. It wasn't distant. It was soft, almost reverent. Celia. She looked up at him, breath shallow, and for a moment, the world shrank down to just the two of them. And when his fingers traced the side of her face, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like a contract. It felt like a promise. The next morning, Celia woke up in her room, the faint light from the window cutting across the floor. Her mind was still thick with sleep, but fragments of the night before played in her head. Reese's voice, the list, the way he said her name like it meant something. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, trying to piece it together. Was it real? Or had she dreamed it? The closeness, the way his touch had felt more like longing than ownership. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A staff member, the same housekeeper who'd looked at her that first day with something like recognition, stood at the door with a tray of breakfast. Mr. Carrington asked me to bring this, she said, placing the tray on the side table. Celia smiled, but the woman didn't leave. Instead, she hesitated. Ma'am, may I say something? Celia nodded. I remember you, the woman whispered. You used to come here when you were little, with your father, before he lost the contracts. You would play in the garden with him. Her heart froze. With who? The housekeeper hesitated. With young Master Reese. You used to chase him around the fountain. You always brought your little frog umbrella, even when it wasn't raining. Celia's mind spun. That's not possible. I would remember, but the woman just gave her a sad, knowing smile. Sometimes the past hides to protect us, she said gently. Celia couldn't breathe. The housekeeper left, and Celia sat on the bed, mind reeling. Reese and her. As children. How could she not remember? She needed answers. Heart pounding, she hurried down the hall to the west wing. The door to Reese's study was half open, and she slipped inside without knocking. He was at the window, back to her, speaking softly into his phone. Yes, handle it. No, I don't want it leaking to the press. He hung up and turned, his expression shifting from tension to something softer when he saw her. Celia? She didn't know how to ask, so she just said it. Why didn't you tell me we knew each other? He stiffened. What? She took a step closer. The housekeeper. She remembered me. Said I used to come here. With my father. That we played together. In the garden. He looked away, jaw tightening. I didn't want to force it on you, he said quietly. Your father. When his business fell apart, he made sure you didn't remember. He never wanted you to look back. He wanted you to believe that life never touched you. That you were safe. Her eyes filled with tears. But you remembered. His voice was raw. Every day, you were my one bright thing. The only friend I had in a house full of people who never saw me. You would come running through the gates with that ridiculous umbrella and drag me out of my lessons just to chase frogs by the pond. She swallowed hard. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me from the start? His eyes finally met hers, and the honesty in them hurt. Because you left. You moved away, and I thought I'd never see you again. And when I found you again, you didn't remember. I didn't want to force you to be that girl again. You've been carrying enough. Silence. It hung between them, thick and bittersweet. She stepped closer. But why marry me? Reese's face softened, the mask slipping. Because you were the only one who made me feel human. You were the girl who handed me half a sandwich and didn't care who I was. And I thought if I could just have that back, maybe I wouldn't feel so hollow anymore. Her hand found his, tentative, but he didn't pull away. You didn't have to save me, she whispered. He gave a soft, broken laugh. Maybe I was trying to save myself. And in that moment, the memory of that rainy day came flooding back. The boy with the sad eyes, the way she'd given him the umbrella and told him he didn't have to be alone. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Reese, I'm so sorry I forgot. He wiped one tear away with his thumb, eyes never leaving hers. You don't have to be sorry. Just don't leave. Not again. She leaned into him, letting his arms wrap around her, feeling the heartbeat that was just as fast as hers. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about the past. It was about finding a way back to each other. The truth sat between them like something fragile and sacred. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world outside the window seemed to hold its breath, as if the house itself wanted to hear what came next. Reese didn't pull away. His hand stayed warm against hers, and she could feel the slight tremor in his grip. Celia looked up, her voice soft but sure. So, you were the boy I gave my umbrella to. He nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line, as if holding back words that had waited too long to be spoken. Yes, and I remember every second of that day. You didn't know what I was going through. You just saw me, drenched, shivering, and alone. You didn't even ask my name. You just handed me that ridiculous frog umbrella and made me laugh. A faint smile touched her lips. It was my favorite. I used to carry it even when it wasn't raining. He allowed a breath, like a half laugh, half sigh. I know. You brought it every time you came, and every time you found me. Like it was your mission to make sure I wasn't alone. Her chest ached with guilt and something warmer, something almost hopeful. But then I left. My father's business fell apart, and we moved away. I didn't even know why. I just lost everything all at once. I thought maybe I'd made it all up, that the boy in the garden wasn't real. Reese looked at her, the intensity in his gaze almost unbearable. I never forgot. I couldn't. Even when I didn't know your name, I kept the memory. I kept that day like it was mine to protect. She touched his hand gently. Why didn't you tell me when you found me again? He swallowed, his eyes dropping to the floor. Because you were struggling. I saw in your eyes. You were holding your family together with pieces that kept falling apart. I didn't want to make you remember something painful. I thought, if I could just be near you, even as a stranger, would be enough. Her heart twisted, and she squeezed his hand. But why the contract? The marriage? He exhaled slowly, as if every word cost him something. Because I thought, if I gave you security, if I made sure your family's business survived, you'd finally be free of that burden. And maybe I could protect you like you protected me, even if you never knew why. Her voice was barely a whisper. You did all this for me. His fingers traced the back of her hand, hesitant but tender. Yes, because you saved me once, and I wanted to give that back, to prove that someone can choose you, without obligation, without debt, just because. Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to speak, but no words felt right. He pulled back, just enough to look at her fully. I know I forced you into a situation. I know it wasn't fair. And if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But I needed you to know I never stopped caring, even when I didn't know how to show it. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Her heart was pounding too loudly, drowning out everything else. Finally, she whispered, Reese, I never wanted to leave. I was just scared that I didn't belong here, that I didn't belong with you. His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. You always belonged with me, even when we were kids. You were the one real thing I ever had. Her hands found his face, her thumb brushing his cheek. And you never gave up on me. I couldn't, he admitted, his voice breaking. You were the girl who saved me in the rain. You made me believe I wasn't invisible, that I could be more. She closed the distance, leaning her forehead against his. I'm sorry I forgot. I'm sorry I made you carry that alone. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, as if letting go would mean losing her all over again. I never blamed you. I just wanted you to know you were worth remembering. A tear slipped down her cheek, and he wiped it away, his touch gentle. And for the first time in years, Celia felt something she hadn't known she needed. She felt chosen, not for business, not for convenience, but because of who she had always been. Reese's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. You were the girl in the rain, and I've been waiting for you ever since. She didn't hesitate. Not anymore. She leaned up and kissed him, a soft, tentative kiss that tasted like hope. And when he kissed her back, it wasn't a contract. It wasn't a deal. It was the promise they never got to make when they were young. The promise to stay, to fight, to never leave each other behind again. Morning light slipped through the curtains, golden and gentle, painting the room in warmth. Celia woke slowly, her head still resting on Reese's shoulder. She hadn't meant to fall asleep like this. Leaning against him on the library couch, his arm wrapped around her like a shelter. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't speak, just let herself breathe in the quiet. His heartbeat was steady under her cheek, and she wondered how many times he'd sat like this, alone in this house, holding on to memories that refused to fade. She shifted slightly, and he stirred, his hand tightening around hers. When his eyes opened, they were softer than she'd ever seen them, unguarded and just a little vulnerable. Morning, she whispered. A faint smile curved his lips. Morning. They stayed like that for a moment, just watching each other, until reality gently intruded. Celia straightened, brushing the sleep from her eyes. I didn't mean to fall asleep here. Reese shook his head, still holding her hand. It's fine. I didn't want to move you. She looked at him, something unspoken between them. What now? He took a deep breath, fingers tracing her knuckles absent-mindedly. We could start over, he offered. No contracts, no expectations, just us, if that's what you want. Her heart ached at the simplicity of it. She wanted to say yes, to throw away all the pretenses and just be with him. But there was still fear, still the worry that this new beginning would be built on fragile ground. What if I'm not the girl you remember? She asked softly. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing against her skin. You're more, he said. You grew up. You fought for your family. You survived when everything was breaking. That's not the girl I remember. That's the woman I'm seeing now. Her breath caught, and she couldn't help the smile that broke through. Why did you choose me, Reese? She asked again, needing to hear it. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. Because you were the first person who didn't look at me like I was nothing. And even after all these years, I couldn't forget how that felt. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were good tears, the kind that didn't feel heavy or painful. She moved closer, their lips just a breath apart. And I didn't realize I needed someone to choose me too. His mouth met hers, slow and sure, and this time there was no hesitation. No distance, just a kiss that felt like a promise. When they finally pulled apart, he whispered, Stay with me. Not because you have to, not because of the contract, just because you want to. Celia traced the line of his jaw, her fingers gentle. Yes, she said softly, because I want to. Later that morning, they walked through the garden together. She pointed to the fountain, laughter in her voice. That's where you tripped and blamed the frog for making you fall. Reese chuckled, a sound that felt freer than before. You never let me forget it. Every time I came back here, I thought of that day. You, holding that ridiculous umbrella, telling me frogs couldn't trip people. They reached the old stone bench, and she sat, pulling him down beside her. Why didn't you say anything that day? She asked. When I left. He looked down, his hand brushing hers. I was just a kid, and I thought, if I deserved to be remembered, you'd come back. But when you didn't, I thought maybe I wasn't worth it. Her heart twisted, and she gripped his hand tighter. I didn't know. I was too young to understand why we moved. My father just said it was for the best. I didn't realize I was leaving someone behind. Reese kissed her temple, his voice soft. I don't blame you. I never did. I just missed you. Even when I didn't know your name, I missed you. They sat in comfortable silence, letting the morning breathe around them. Celia knew they weren't perfect. They were still figuring it out. But for the first time, she didn't feel out of place. She felt chosen. And when Reese looked at her, his hand in hers, she knew he felt the same. 1 year later, the garden was different now. The flowers were blooming in late spring colors, and the fountain had been cleaned and restored. The old bench had been replaced with a new one, carved from dark wood and etched with 2 words. Always chosen. Celia stood in front of it, smoothing her dress. A pale blue one that Reese had picked out, because he said it matched her eyes. The guests were gathering on the lawn, friends, family, even a few familiar faces from Reese's business world. But this time, no one was judging. No one was questioning why she was there. Because now everyone knew. Reese stood under the archway, dressed in a tailored suit, but with no tie, relaxed, comfortable. His eyes were focused on her, a quiet smile on his lips. As she walked toward him, her heart wasn't pounding out of fear. It was just full of memories, of promises, of mornings spent laughing and evenings spent talking. She reached him, and he took her hands, squeezing them gently. The officiant smiled and began to speak, but Reese lifted a hand, cutting him off. "Actually," he said softly, his gaze never leaving hers, "I'd like to say something first." Celia's eyebrows lifted, but she nodded, squeezing his hands back. He took a breath. "Celia, the first time I saw you, you were holding an umbrella too big for you, with frogs on it, and you told me I didn't have to be alone. I didn't know it then, but you saved me. Not just that day, but every day since. You made me believe that someone could see me for more than just my name or my family or my silence." Her eyes welled with tears, but she smiled. Reese continued, his voice steady but soft. "I thought I could make you mine by signing a contract. I thought if I controlled it, I wouldn't lose you again. But love doesn't work that way. You taught me that. Love is a choice, and I choose you. Every day, without conditions." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Celia's breath caught. He opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring, a sapphire in the center, surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It's blue," he said, smiling a little, "like your eyes. And I wanted it to remind you that no matter where life takes us, I'll always choose you." Celia wiped a tear, laughing softly. "I didn't think you'd be so romantic," she teased. He grinned. "Neither did I." Taking a deep breath, he dropped to one knee, holding the ring up. This time, no contracts, no business, just me, Reese Carrington, asking the girl who once saved me in the rain to marry me for real. "Will you?" Her hands were trembling, but she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." The guests erupted into cheers, but Reese didn't move. He slipped the ring on her finger, then stood, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like freedom. When they pulled apart, he whispered against her lips, "Finally, no more pretending." Celia laughed, touching his cheek. "No more pretending," she agreed. And as the sunlight warmed the garden and the people they loved surrounded them, Celia realized that this was what it meant to be truly chosen. To love without conditions. To find home not in a place, but in a person. And to know that some stories don't just end. They begin again. And there you have it, Soul Seekers, a love that started with a contract but found its way back to the heart. Sometimes the people we think we've forgotten are the ones who shaped us the most. And sometimes, life gives us a second chance to hold on to what we didn't even know we'd lost. If this story touched you, if you believe that love can find its way even through years of silence and sacrifice, give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people discover stories that make them feel, hope, and heal. And before you go, tell me in the comments, have you ever reconnected with someone from your past and found that they never really left your heart? Type, "Love finds a way," if you believe that sometimes memories can become new beginnings. Make sure to subscribe to Hearts of the Rich for more stories like this, where every fortune hides a secret and every love has a past. Until next time, stay curious, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in second chances.